The silent room. The room was full of golden lights, cameras, and whispers. The Hollywood legends were gathered in one place. There were red carpets, flashing cameras, and voices that carried power. This was the night of celebration, a big award show where the world would see smiles, speeches, and shining trophies. Brendan Fraser stood quietly near the corner. He wore a simple black suit. It wasn't designer or loud, just honest, just like him. He looked around and smiled at the people he once called friends, co-stars, and heroes. But no one came to him. They passed him by like he was part of the wall. Some nodded politely. Most didn't even look. Others pretended not to notice. Brendan kept smiling, even as his eyes told another story. He was used to this silence now, used to the way fame gives, then takes. How the same hands that clap for you can also turn cold. He had lived the highs, blockbusters, applause, fan letters. And he had walked through the lows, health problems, personal loss, and a career that Hollywood forgot. But tonight, he came not for awards. He came to show up. He came to prove that he still had a heart that beats for the art. He came with courage, even when the world gave him no reason to. From the other side of the room, Keanu Reeves entered. He was tall, calm, and moved like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. His suit was simple too, not loud, not shiny, just like him. A quiet strength. People noticed Keanu. They always did. He nodded with a soft smile. He spoke kindly to staff, shook hands with cameramen, and thanked the woman who handed him his seat card. But when Keanu sat down, something caught his eye. In the far corner, Brendan stood with a paper cup of water. Alone. Keanu watched. He noticed the way others moved around him like he didn't exist. He saw Brendan smile, the one that tried too hard to hide the sadness. Keanu didn't say anything. He simply stood up and began to walk. Every camera in the room started moving. Heads turned, voices dropped, because Keanu Reeves was walking, not to the stage, not to the stars, but to a man who had been forgotten. When Brendan saw him coming, his smile changed. It wasn't forced anymore. It was surprised. It was real. Keanu reached him. No loud words, no fake hug for the cameras, just a warm, strong hand on Brendan's shoulder. And then something simple, something powerful. "I'm glad you're here." Brendan didn't know what to say. His voice cracked. "You noticed?" Keanu nodded. "I always did." For a moment, the noise in the room faded. And in that silence, the world remembered something. Respect, humility, kindness. A few others watched the moment and felt something stir inside them. Guilt, maybe, or admiration. Or the sharp sting of being reminded what real decency looked like. But Keanu wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to make a scene. He just saw a man standing alone, and decided that was wrong. They stood there for a minute. Two men who had both known pain. Both had been broken. Both had seen how cruel this industry could be. But tonight, one chose to lift the other. Keanu led Brendan toward the main hall. People watched but said nothing. The cameras followed. Suddenly, Brendan Fraser wasn't invisible anymore, and he didn't feel small, because someone stood beside him, and that made all the difference. The echo of footsteps, the room didn't know how to react. People stared as Keanu and Brendan walked side by side. Some smiled nervously. Some whispered to the person next to them. Others just looked away, embarrassed by their own silence. Brendan could feel the eyes, but for the first time in a long while, they didn't burn. They didn't carry pity. They carried something else. Curiosity. Maybe even respect. Keanu leaned slightly and said, "You good?" Brendan nodded slowly. "I think so. I haven't had this many people look at me in years." Keanu gave a soft smile. "Then let them see who you really are." They found seats near the middle of the hall. It wasn't front row. It wasn't hidden either. Keanu didn't care about being close to the stage. He cared about making a statement without saying a word. As they sat, an old director walked by, someone Brendan had worked with years ago. The man paused, gave a stiff nod, then moved on without a word. Brendan looked down at his hands. "They remember," he whispered. "They just don't want to." Keanu turned to him. "Then you remind them, not by shouting, not by begging, but by standing tall." Brendan looked at him for a long second. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu's voice was calm. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible in a room full of people. And because you never stopped being a good man. You just got quieter." Brendan tried to smile, but it broke in the middle. He remembered the days when his name was everywhere. Magazines, posters, talk shows. But then the injuries came. Surgeries, personal heartbreaks. And suddenly, Hollywood had no space for a man who couldn't dance on demand. He wasn't a headline anymore. He was a memory. Until now. The show began. Lights dimmed, music played, hosts cracked jokes. The audience laughed. Brendan sat still, his eyes watching but his thoughts far away. During a tribute section, a video played showing iconic actors from the 90s. The crowd clapped at each face. On the screen, Will Smith, Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts. Then Brendan's face appeared, younger, smiling, full of life. Some clapped, but most stayed quiet. It was like the world didn't know what to do with him. "Cheer, stay silent, pretend he wasn't there." Keanu clapped, loud and sure. People turned toward him, confused. But Keanu kept clapping. One person joined, then another, and another. Soon, the room was clapping for Brendan Fraser, not because they remembered, but because someone reminded them he mattered. Brendan sat frozen, his lips trembled. He looked around as the room gave him something he hadn't felt in years, acknowledgement. His eyes found Keanu's. No words were needed. Just a small, grateful nod. After the segment, a young actress passed by. She stopped, looked at Brendan, and said softly, "You were my childhood. Thank you." Brendan blinked. "Really?" She smiled. "George of the Jungle was everything to me." Brendan laughed for the first time that night. "That tree almost broke my back." She smiled wider. "And still, you made us laugh." As she walked away, Keanu said, "See? The world remembers heart, even if it takes time." Brendan turned to him. "You didn't have to do this." Keanu shrugged. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." Outside the hall, social media began to buzz. Who was Brendan Fraser sitting with? Is that Keanu Reeves? Why is everyone suddenly clapping for Brendan? A single photo was posted. Keanu with his hand on Brendan's shoulder. It spread like wildfire. People online began sharing memories of Brendan's films. Clips from The Mummy, Encino Man, and School Ties flooded the internet. The world was watching again. But inside the room, Brendan still wasn't thinking about fame. He was thinking about the sound of that applause, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Not as a comeback story, but as a man who never gave up, and the only reason he got to feel that was because someone stood up. Someone who didn't care about trends. Someone who only cared about doing the right thing. Keanu sat beside him like a shield, against the cold wind, and Brendan Fraser sat a little straighter because of it. Whispers behind curtains. After the tribute ended, the room shifted. People moved from their seats during the short break, making their way to the hallway where drinks were served and small talk ruled. The energy was lighter, but behind every smile was a question. And the main question tonight wasn't about the next award. It was about Keanu and Brendan. Brendan stood near the wall, his cup of water in hand again. He didn't need champagne. He needed calm. His hands still shook a little from the moment they shared inside the hall. Not from nerves, but from disbelief. From something waking up deep inside him. Keanu was standing nearby, speaking with a costume designer who once worked with both of them. He wasn't bragging or drawing attention. He just made space. Real space. For others. A young reporter from an online entertainment channel approached them. Her hands were trembling as she held her mic. She wasn't assigned to interview either of them, but something inside her had pushed her forward. She looked at Brendan, then at Keanu. "Sir, I know this isn't on the schedule, but may I ask you something? Off the record, if you want." Keanu turned to Brendan and nodded gently, as if to say, "Your call." Brendan took a deep breath and said, "Sure." The reporter swallowed. "Why do you think Hollywood forgot you?" The question hit hard, but not like a punch, more like an open wound being touched carefully. Brendan smiled sadly. "Because when you fall here, people think you've failed. They don't ask why, they don't wait, they move on." The reporter's eyes welled up. "But you didn't fail." "No," he said. "I just broke for a while." She looked at Keanu. "And you? Why did you come to him tonight?" Keanu took a quiet breath. "Because kindness shouldn't wait for an audience. And because this man gave more than he ever got back." The reporter stepped back, thanking them softly. That short clip never aired officially, but someone nearby had recorded it. Within hours, it spread everywhere. The internet had seen celebrity interviews before, but this was something different. This was raw. This was true. As they walked back inside for the next part of the ceremony, the room had changed. Brendan was no longer invisible. An actor he hadn't spoken to in over a decade gave him a long handshake and whispered, "I should have called you." "I'm sorry." A producer nodded with respect. A cameraman gave him a thumbs up, and someone in the second row stood when Brendan walked past, just to show they saw him. Not everyone changed that night. Some still pretended. Others clapped just to fit in. But the air was shifting. A silent man had stood up, and now people were listening. When the next presenter walked on stage, they held a golden envelope. "This next award," she said, "goes to someone who reminds us that courage sometimes means showing up even when no one's watching." Brendan held his breath, but the name called wasn't his. He smiled anyway. It didn't sting. Not this time. Because tonight, he wasn't there for an award. He was there for something deeper, and he had already received it. After the show ended, Keanu and Brendan walked together toward the exit. The night air outside was cool and silent. No flashing lights, no shouting fans. Just quiet. Brendan looked up at the sky. "It's strange," he said. "I spent so long wishing for people to notice me again. But now that they have, I don't feel like I need it anymore." Keanu looked at him. "You only needed to be reminded that you matter." Brendan nodded. "Thank you, Keanu, not just for tonight, but for not forgetting." Keanu paused, then said, "You never stopped being Brendan Fraser. You just stopped being the version they wanted. But you're still here. And that's enough." They stood in silence as the world buzzed around them. In a city full of noise, two men stood still. One remembered, the other never forgetting. And somewhere, far from the red carpet, someone watched their story online and whispered, "I needed this tonight." The storm that never broke him. The next morning, the headlines weren't about who won Best Actor. They weren't about the red carpet dresses or the jokes told on stage. They were about something deeper. Keanu Reeves and Brendan Fraser Steele. The night without saying a word, the quiet kindness Hollywood forgot. "I always did." Keanu's 4 words that broke the internet. People across the world watched the videos, saw the pictures, and felt something stir inside them. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was longing. For a world where being kind wasn't rare, where respect wasn't something you earned by staying relevant, but by staying real. Meanwhile, Brendan sat in his small living room, his phone on the coffee table buzzing every few seconds. Messages from old friends. Calls from people who had once ghosted him. A text from a studio executive. Can we talk? He didn't know how to feel. Part of him wanted to cry. Another part didn't trust it yet, because this world, this business, had taught him how quickly it could love you and how quickly it could leave. Keanu had sent him a message too. Just 3 words. You did good. Brendan stared at it for a long time. The truth was, he hadn't done anything dramatic. He hadn't given a speech, hadn't taken the mic. He had just stood there. But maybe that was enough. His mind drifted back to the years he had spent off the screen. Those long, quiet days filled with pain and healing. The surgeries, the lonely hospital rooms. The days when getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain. He remembered the nights when he would scroll through old fan messages just to remind himself that he had mattered once. He remembered trying to read scripts with blurry eyes, wondering if anyone would ever trust him to carry a film again. He remembered walking down grocery store aisles with a baseball cap pulled low, praying no one would recognize him, because he didn't want them to see what was left. But now the world saw him, and they didn't turn away. Later that evening, Brendan went for a walk. No security, no suit. Just him and the wind. He passed by a small bookstore. Through the window, he saw a group of teenagers watching his clip with Keanu on a tablet. One of them wiped a tear. Another smiled. Brendan stepped inside, not sure why. The woman at the counter recognized him. Her eyes widened, but she didn't scream. She didn't ask for a photo. She just said softly, "Thank you for coming back." He nodded, heart heavy. As he turned to leave, she said something that stopped him cold. "My son has anxiety. He doesn't leave his room much. But last night, he watched that clip of you and Keanu, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled." Brendan felt his throat tighten. Outside, as he walked again, the sky had turned orange with sunset. He stopped by a small bench and sat down. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a young director. Someone who had made a few successful films. "Brendan, I don't know if you're open to working again, but I wrote something for you. It's not big budget, but it's honest, and I think you'll see yourself in it. Even if you say no, thank you for reminding us what real looks like." Brendan read the message twice. He didn't respond yet. Instead, he looked out at the street, at the people walking by, at the world that had gone on without him for years. But something had shifted. He was no longer chasing it. He was part of it again, and the world was watching. Not out of pity, but out of love. Back at home, Brendan stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He looked at his reflection, the lines on his face, the scars, the softness in his eyes. He whispered, "You made it. Not to the top, but through the storm," and that was everything. The stage he didn't expect, 2 weeks passed. The story of Brendan Fraser and Keanu Reeves had reached every corner of the internet. Talk shows spoke about it. Fans created tribute videos, and articles kept appearing, calling it the most genuine moment in recent Hollywood memory. But Brendan had stayed quiet. He hadn't posted online. He hadn't gone on interviews. He had simply taken walks, replied to old friends, and read the script that the young director had sent him. It was a small story. Quiet. Personal. It was about a man who used to be a hero in movies, now working at a secondhand bookstore, helping people find stories after forgetting his own. It was slow, emotional, and real. When Brendan finished reading it, he cried, not because it was perfect, but because it felt like home. He messaged the director, "Let's do it." Just a few minutes later, his phone rang. It wasn't the director, it was Keanu. "You're doing it?" Keanu asked, voice calm and steady. "Yeah," Brendan said softly. "I think it's time." Keanu paused. "You'll be great. Just be you." "Will you?" Brendan hesitated. Will you come to the first table read? Not as a co-star, just, I don't know. For strength? Keanu smiled on the other end. I'll be there. The next week, in a small room inside a rented office space in Los Angeles, a group of people sat around a table with printed scripts and plastic cups of coffee. Brendan walked in, wearing a blue sweater and jeans. His hands trembled a little, but his eyes were strong. He saw the crew. Young actors, a soft-spoken director, a woman with short hair and thick glasses who would be producing it, and Keanu, sitting in the corner, quiet as always, with a water bottle and a notebook. Brendan gave him a small nod. Keanu raised a thumb and whispered, "Go get him." The table read began. Brendan spoke his lines, slowly at first, unsure, then with warmth, then with fire. By the end of the second act, the room was silent. Not because they weren't listening, but because they were fully there, completely inside his words, inside his pain, his love, his heart. After the reading ended, there was a long pause. Then someone clapped. Then everyone did. Brendan sat down slowly, as if he couldn't believe the noise. The director walked up to him. "You didn't act tonight," she said. "You lived." Brendan smiled. "That's all I've got left." "And that," she said, "is more than enough." As filming began, the days were filled with long hours and small moments. It wasn't a big-budget set. There were no trailers, no paparazzi. But there was heart. Brendan gave everything. Each line, each look, each silence, and word began to spread. Industry people started whispering about his performance. How honest it felt. How rare it was. Then something happened that Brendan never expected. A message came from the producers of a global film festival. They wanted to honor him, not for a single film, but for what he represented: resilience, humility, and the power of staying kind when life gets cruel. The invitation was simple. "Would you accept our Lifetime Recognition Award on the closing night?" Brendan sat in silence, staring at the screen. A few years ago, no one remembered his name. Now, they wanted to honor his journey. He didn't know what to say, so he texted Keanu. "They want to give me a Lifetime Award. Should I go?" Keanu replied within seconds. "They should have done it years ago." "Go. Not for them. For you." The night of the festival came. The hall was filled with filmmakers, actors, students, dreamers, and critics. Brendan walked slowly toward the stage when his name was called. The applause started quietly, then grew into a wave that filled the room. He stood at the podium, holding the glass trophy. He looked at the crowd and paused. Then he spoke. "I don't know how to make a perfect speech. I'm not great with big words, but I do know what it feels like to be forgotten, and I know what it feels like when someone remembers you." His voice cracked slightly. "This isn't an award for my work. It's a reminder that being broken doesn't mean you're done. Sometimes it means you're ready to begin again. I owe this moment to someone who saw me when no one else did." He didn't say the name, but everyone knew. In the front row, Keanu looked up with soft eyes. Brendan's voice became steady again. "Kindness doesn't make headlines, but it saves people. It saved me." The room stood in a long, honest standing ovation, and Brendan, holding that award, smiled, not because he won something, but because he had finally come back to himself. The man who stayed gentle. The weeks after the award night passed like waves, soft, strong, and steady. Brendan's film was released quietly. No huge premiere, no fireworks, but it spread like fire across hearts. Audiences cried in small theaters. Young actors called it the most human film of the year. Reviewers who once ignored him now wrote long, thoughtful pieces filled with one word again and again: honest. But the real success wasn't in awards or reviews. It was in how people responded. Letters poured in, emails, messages, handwritten, notes from strangers. A teacher wrote, Your story helped one of my students open up after months of silence. A father shared, "My son is fighting to recover from surgery. We watched your film together. It gave us both hope." A woman simply said, "Thank you for coming back. We never stopped waiting." Brendan read every word. He didn't try to reply to all. There were too many, but he read them. Every single one. He kept them in a wooden box beside his bed, and every night he opened it. Not to relive fame, but to remind himself of what he almost forgot. That he mattered. That stories could still begin, even after the world says they're over. Keanu, as always, stayed quiet in the background. He never tried to take credit. Never gave interviews about what he did that night. He just sent Brendan a message after the film's release. "Proud of you." The world needed this. Brendan replied, "I needed you. Thank you for standing up when no one else did." Keanu's last message said, "You'd have done the same." And he meant it. Because behind every great comeback, there's usually someone who held the door open. Months later, Brendan was invited to speak at a film school. He stood in front of a room full of young students, some full of fire, others full of fear. He told them stories about falling, about breaking, about nights when hope felt like a joke. Then he told them about kindness. He said, "You might never win an Oscar. You might get replaced. You might be forgotten. But you always have the choice to be kind. And that might save someone." A student raised her hand. "How did you survive when no one believed in you?" Brendan smiled. "Someone believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. One person is enough." When the lecture ended, students lined up just to shake his hand. They didn't want selfies. They just wanted to thank him. And Brendan, in his quiet, gentle way, gave every one of them his time. That night, he walked home alone. The city lights soft around him. He stopped at a small cafe. He sat at a corner table, sipping tea, watching. People passed by outside, and for the first time in many years, he didn't feel like a shadow. He felt whole. He felt peace. He smiled to himself, whispering, "You made it." Somewhere in another part of town, Keanu walked out of a theater after watching Brendan's film one more time. He pulled his cap low, hands in his coat pockets, and stepped quietly into the night. He didn't need the world to know what he had done. He just needed to know that his friend was standing tall again, and that was enough. The world keeps moving. Fame comes and goes. Applause fades. But kindness stays. Humility echoes. And sometimes, one quiet moment can light 1,000 more. They had ignored Brendan Fraser until one man stood up and reminded everyone what it means to be human.